Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
We've been expecting you.
Monday, time for our maven of the supernatural, Denise Pridemore. This is the Paranormal Pride. Join to listen and chat live on WBHM-DB.com or Spreaker app. Search WBHM-DB every Monday at 7 p.m. Central for your supernatural paranormal fix. Welcome to the Paranormal Pride, where the show is about the guest and the listener.
Welcome to the Paranormal Pride. Welcome tonight to my guest, Dennis Stone, who I'm very, very grateful to for coming on tonight, because Karen Smurl, who was supposed to be on tonight, has been sick all day. She's got laryngitis, and of course we can't hear her. So we have Dennis is coming on, and I told him before we had him on, and that I don't know anything about his location, so he is going to teach us about America's Stonehenge tonight. And because I have, when I heard about it, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know we had one. I knew about Stonehenge in Virginia, only because I used to live by it. And of course, Stonehenge is kind of like a joke, but this is not a joke. This is an ancient site in America, and I'd like for all of you guys to hear about it, because this is not something that I knew about, and I think Dennis is going to be able to tell us something that we didn't know before. And I know for most of you, I stick with paranormal, but I'm going to be getting more into some cryptids and things like that in the future, since I met a whole bunch of cryptid people over the weekend. They were kind of cryptid themselves, so it was kind of neat. But I want you guys to know a little bit more about America's Stonehenge. Welcome, Dennis.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on this evening.
So, how did you come across being the owner of America's Stonehenge?
Yes, actually, it's a family affair. My dad, Robert Stone, got involved with it back in the 1950s. And he passed away about 10 years ago, and I had already been involved for decades. So, it's been almost 65 years. And my dad actually heard about this on a radio show on a big Boston station, and on a Friday night. And he was just listening, and he lived in Derry, New Hampshire, in southern New Hampshire, right next to where this America's Stonehenge is located, about 7 miles from where he lived, and never heard anything about this site. And so the topic of that discussion on that radio show was all about these strange stone ruins located in North Salem, New Hampshire, and the questions of who built it, why it was there, who the people were, where did they come from, how old is it, and what happened to the people that built it. And it really amazed him. He just couldn't believe that this thing was right down the street from him. And after the show, a few days later, he was at a barber shop just having his hair done, and he reached down and picked up a magazine to look at to kill a little bit of time. And he opened it up, and it was a magazine called New Hampshire Profile. It was a nice magazine. It ran for decades. It's no longer around, but pictures of the site with all these stone ruins, and a whole article about it, which, as he read, he said, this is the same, place that I just heard on the radio show. Quite amazing what a coincidence it was. And even more so, that magazine had been sitting in the barber shop since 1952. So it was a 3-year-old, article. And he asked the barber if he could keep it. And he said, well, how old is that? And he goes, it's 3 years old. So he went on the weekend, they went over to my aunt and uncle's house, and everybody was playing cards around a table, probably drinking a little beer and having a nice time, about 10 people, I think. My dad took the magazine, kind of handed it out, and asked if anybody had ever heard of this place, And it kind of passed around the table. Nobody really recognized it until it got to my aunt and uncle. And when they saw it, they looked at it, kind of stared at it, and said, oh, yeah, we used to go there back in the 1930s, about 20 years before that. And they picnicked up there. And it was kind of an informal picnic area. People kind of knew about it locally. And people would go up there and have a picnic lunch and kind of explore all these, stone chambers and ruins and all the different features that are there. So the next question, my dad said, can you find it? And they said, well, maybe we can find it. We haven't been there in 20 years. We'll give it a look. So the next day they went driving all around North Salem trying to find the place. Eventually they did find it. And they found an old road that actually that takes you up to the site. And when they got up there, my dad climbed into this chain link fence, which is actually still there today, and snuck in and wandered around the site. And after, probably half an hour to an hour, he came back out, and my aunt and uncle, my mom said, hey, how was it? And he goes, it's amazing. I've never seen anything like this. And then he goes, something about he'd like to own it, maybe do research and open it up to the public. And my mom said something about you got rocks in your head, so that's basically where the family history began with this. My dad had been in the Coast Guard for a couple of years before that up in Newfoundland, and he was always fascinated by history. And in Newfoundland is where the Vikings landed. And he was there about up to 1953. So 7 years later, they discovered the first Viking settlement in North America, Alonzo Meadow. And he would have definitely gone up there, if he had known it at the time, but he was 7 years too early for that. So eventually, after 1955, he met the owner of the property and eventually worked out an agreement to actually open the place up to the public for the first time ever, officially, And he had to go to the bank, work with them. He put up a visitor center. And in June of 1958, 61 years ago, he opened it to the public right about the summer solstice. And so he worked at AT&T starting, I think, in 1950, right after the Coast Guard. He worked there for 30 years. So he had a full-time job, and he ran the business. And basically, we've all done the same thing. I was an airline captain for 35 years. I just retired, and I have a son who's also an engineer. My dad was at AT&T Bell Labs engineer. My son's an electromechanical engineer. And so it's always been kind of a family affair. And in 1964, my dad started a research organization that's still going very strong. It's called the New England Antiquities Research Association, a nonprofit group. And they have several hundred members. They have a couple meetings a year. And this group has found about 800 of these stone-type ruins across the Northeast, from Canada and Quebec all the way down into Pennsylvania. And we actually have similar type stone features found in eastern Colorado, Alabama, and even some in Indiana. And so it's not just our site, but it might be a much wider, broader group of stone builders that has been kind of under the radar, undiscovered, or forgotten about in the past. We think our site's a ceremonial site, actually, not a living place. And it's about 110 acres. It's on a hill about 360 feet above sea level. Boston, Massachusetts is 40 miles to the south. And the ocean's only about 20 statute miles to the east. And if people came in and built a site from elsewhere, they could have come in on the ocean. They could have come in within about 5 miles of the top of the hill on a river called the Merrimack River, one of the biggest rivers in New England. And it has tributaries that go right by our site. But the site, we think, is not our living place, but we think it's an actual ceremonial place and a possible burial place. And it's astronomically aligned with 26 astronomical alignments that we've been able to prove. And there's 23 unconfirmed star alignments, so a possibility of 49 alignments with the heavens. So like Stonehenge in England, it's an astronomical site. And that's why the name America Stonehenge, because of the function of the site, not the form of it. And I know there is a Foamhenge in Virginia, and there's a couple other Stonehenges across the nation, including a Carhenge too. But ours is really an ancient site, not kind of a modern, construct, if you will. So it is much like the megalithic sites in Western Europe. Stonehenge is well known to the world, I believe they get about 1 million visitors a year. It's also similar to our site in that it's not a living place. It was a tomb, temple, and a monument, basically, and astronomically aligned. But there are about 50,000 megalithic sites in Europe. Most people don't know that that number exists. These type of structures actually go through Russia, China, India. Korea had about 80,000 of these. And recently we found out they're not only in South Africa, but they're in Australia. And people can get on and Google these things like the Aussie Stonehenge, and South America has them too. So 6 out of 7 continents seem to have these ancient ruins. They go back from about 3,000 years before present, and they can go back to several thousand years before, basically from the New Stone Age in Europe, the New Stone Age, the Neolithic, into the Bronze Age. And when the Iron Age came about 3,000 years ago, it seems like the megalithic building, at least in Western Europe, came to a halt. And for some reason, they stopped building these magnificent, huge ruins, and more forts seem to have been built because iron is very readily available for tools, utensils, and weapons. So I think that site is a ceremonial site, not a living place.
There's a lot of questions that come to mind. Do you believe that these sites are along ley lines? You think
Probably.
That has anything to do with it?
Maybe. That is interesting. I know that Alfred Watkins, almost 100 years ago, was looking at, he lived in England, he was looking at places like Old Sarum, which I've been to, not too far from Stonehenge. It's an ancient hill fort. Stonehenge, Avebury, which is one of the biggest megalithic sites in Europe, and a couple other places were all kind of on a straight line, and he called it the old straight track. And he thought it was more kind of about, they set up these sites in a line so you could actually travel along these lines, and it was more for a practical reason. But other people started finding out they might be set on power points. The Earth has a sacred geometry, that these sites were actually ancient magnifiers or of energy, so that kind of thing has come about over the years. Our site, if you look at the summer solstice sunrise, about 7 years ago, my son was using Google Earth, and he took a line from summer solstice sunrise, which, towards the northeast, went across Maine, past the eastern Canadian provinces, right across the ocean eventually, just for kicks, and it came into England, in southern England. And we've been to Stonehenge a number of times. He's been there a couple of times. So, gee, it looks like it goes through southern England, probably not too far from Stonehenge, in that general area. But as you change the scale on the map, it kept getting closer, and he kept recognizing he's going to, starting to see the towns and all the landmarks, and all of a sudden there's Stonehenge, and the line went right through the center of Stonehenge, one of the large trilithons. There's a horseshoe pattern of trilithons, and it went right through it, actually kind of like one and then the one on the other side. And I was like, wow, well, that's interesting, And that actually made it onto the History Channel's America on Earth, which is now on Travel Channel. It's moved over there. It became part of that whole program, which was filmed in 2012, and it aired in 2013 and brought us a lot of attention. So we tried a couple other things, too, with some of the astronomical alignments. And the true south alignment, there is a true north stone. It's these stones that stood up there, monoliths. They look like big arrowheads, several feet tall, that would align with the sun or the moon or even a star. And they're pretty significant. They were part of the bedrock. They quarried them. They transported them, these multi-ton stones, and then they put them up vertically. And above the North Star stone is the North Star today, and it's Polaris, and it's the only star that really doesn't move in the sky. It doesn't rise nor set. 4,000 years ago, however, a star called Thuban, and Thuban is part of a constellation called Draco the Dragon, or Serpent. And in 4,000 years ago, that North Stone was pointed right at that. If you go 180 degrees behind, you look true south, that line goes right through Machu Picchu in Peru. And we found that the winter solstice to the southwest, that alignment goes through the moon pyramid in Teotihuacan down in north of Mexico City, and I've been to that. It's a magnificent site. It's huge. But the second biggest pyramid of the 3 big pyramids is the moon pyramid, and that line goes right through the center of it. It's like, you can do it over and over and over again just to make sure you did it accurately. I was like, oh, that was, pretty cool, and people will call that a ley line, To the west, equinox, spring and fall, sunset, that line goes through Pueblo Bonito at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, which we were out there 3 weeks ago. That's a world, it's UNESCO World Heritage Site. like the other ones are too, actually. If you go to the sunrise on equinox, it goes through the pyramids in the Canary Islands, and they're pretty cool. If you've never seen those, or at least pictures of them, they're pretty cool. I didn't know they existed until I was playing around with Google Earth and found they were there, and this line goes right through them. I was kind of surprised.
Oh, the Canary Islands are very interesting. And you know what? I'm going to have to stop you here. We got our first break. So everyone, you're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. We will be back in a few minutes with our guest, Dennis Stone.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming. To the skeptic, there will never be enough. Hello everyone. Join Kevin and Jennifer Malik, the host of Paraversal Universe, every Friday here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET-FM and The Rift. Log on or tune in as they check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, cryptids and monsters, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, metaphysics, and forbidden archaeology. Listen as Kevin and Jennifer interview the top minds in their respective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries. For future show and archive information, one can find Paraversal Universe on Facebook, Twitter, and MeWe under various Paraversal Universe headings. So, for excellent talk radio about the unknown and unexplained, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society, Ltd., and produced by WBHM-DB.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. I'm your host, Denise Pridemore, and my guest tonight is Dennis Stone, the owner of America's Stonehenge. And we've been talking about, well, the first thing we talked about was how his family became the owners of such an unusual site. And it wasn't by accident, apparently. So that is so far the story is very amazing, and that you've been to all of these other locations that have a similar use background.
Right, yeah. I haven't been to Machu Picchu or to the Canary Islands. I've been to Spain, but yeah, we've been to a lot of these sites, in Malta, and they're all over the world, and kind of on my bucket list. There must be 1 million of these places you can visit, literally, across the landscape. And there's some chambers right down the street from us, like in a town called Wyndham. It's only a couple miles away. And one of the chambers, it has a certain shape, size, and everything. And I show a picture of one from the Ural Mountains in Russia. There's actually a web page for that called the Ural Mountain Megaliths. About 3,500 of them there. And again, they're Stone Age or ancient. And over there, people consider them very old. Over here in the Northeast, they say, oh, these things are all colonial, post-colonial root cellars. But there's one in Wyndham, and I show a picture of that, and then one of the ones that actually pops up first on that website in the Ural Mountains, everybody goes, well, it's the same structure. And I go, well, no, it's not, but it has the same roof. It has a big, gigantic roof slab, and then it'll have like a space, and then it has a lintel over the doorway. And in between that space are like stone cobbles and those structures. The same, vertical stacking for the doorway. And in front of the door, in both of them, there's like a big stone that looks like it was like a blocking stone, almost like a stone door in front of them laying in the same position. And people think it's the same picture. And I'm like, well, that one's 7 miles and the other one's 7,000 miles. And the one over, in Russia and cuts throughout Europe and everything and all the way into Asia, they believe these are ancient. But in the States, we're not supposed to have any ancient stonework made by man in the Northeast in the ancient past. They're supposed to be relatively new. So they call them root cellars.
That's not true, because at one time we were all one continent. Yeah,
going way, way back we were, yeah.
Right.
But I thought as people were actually using the oceans as highways, not as barriers, and
right.
It's possible people were crossing the oceans at a much earlier time. But you're correct, yeah, the continents were together, but it was a very, very early time. But we've been taught that the ocean, the world is flat, and the oceans, if you went too far, you'd venture out, you'd fall off the edge. And then even Columbus and people before him, I think the Phoenicians were another group. They realized that the oceans, it wasn't where you're going to fall off the edge of the earth, that the earth is round. And actually, the Phoenicians may be one of the groups that came out of the Middle East on the Phoenician coast, where Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and the Golan Heights are, and came across the Mediterranean, set up 50 trading colonies, and then they set up colonies around Africa, and they were great merchants. And Phoenician type writing and they're in Spain too, and the Celts were there, and ancient Libyans were in Spain too, the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. And according to one scholar, and actually a doctor from Harvard University, Dr. Barry Fell, he wrote several books back in the 70s and 80s. He said that these markings found from North to South America, from the East Coast to the West Coast, are Old World markings, both from across the Pacific as well as across the Atlantic. And he identified 3 markings at our site as being Phoenician, Libyan, and Celt. He said, however, the style looks like it came out of Iberia, Spain, and Portugal. It's a slight difference in the way the letters were and the way they created the words. And so he felt that it was a melting pot in Spain and Portugal, and that they used that as a stepping stone to the New World, just like Christopher Columbus did, 500 years ago. But they were coming over, possibly at least 1500 BC is his thought. And from here all the way out to the West Coast, they're finding, Celtic Ogham markings and Phoenician writing, and also Libyan markings have been found in different areas too, including, at our museum. So I felt it was an old world. Now, Native Americans, they grew back in New Hampshire between 10 and 12,000 years, so they're definitely here. And the question comes up, did they have a big, big part in some of these stone ruins in New England, or partly involved with it or not involved with it, And there are legends that, and even some Native American chiefs we talked to, that say their oral tradition says, no, it was a different people that built these. And one of them was at our site, I think 2 years ago. I just saw a video by him. He was invited over to Switzerland, and I was supposed to be at a lecture with him, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him this year. But he was over there, and he did it by a recording he did, and I did it because in person. But he said, yeah, he came to our site, and he felt it was a different people. His oral tradition said it wasn't, his ancestors that built it. And he is kind of a local Native American group, and we've heard other people speak like that too, So we're not really sure. But the stone structures do have a strong resemblance to those Western megalithic sites, very much so. And then you have the inscriptions. And Dr. Barry Fell also created a list, many pages of words that are Algonquin, Native American, and will have a certain meaning, like a river, a mountain, valley, or gorge, all over New England, really like Cortakichi Gorge, Lake Memphremagog, Merrimack River, Amoskeag River, Mount Monadnock, all these different names. But they're also Gaelic or Celtic, and they have the same word with the same meaning on the other side of the ocean, But not just a few words, but list after list and list of words. Seemed to indicate that people were traveling the oceans and in contact with one another well before, before Christopher Columbus or the Vikings came over, for a matter of fact.
Well, I know that a little bit ago you said that you went on a trip to New Mexico. And I know that we went through the Painted Desert, and we saw a bunch of the Neolithic, I think that's what it was. We saw a lot of writing on the walls that was not done by anybody recently, done by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. And I know that since you were just out that way, you said you went to New Mexico, and apparently we were out there at the same time because we just got back on the 13th.
And I think we were the 14th we got back. Yeah, we got back on Saturday, got back on Friday. I think it was that's Friday the 13th, I think, right?
Yeah. So we may pass each other on the highway.
We could have. Hope we didn't cut you off or anything. But
it was really quite
in the same area. Yeah.
So
it's so beautiful out there. It's so big country. It's amazing.
So my only experience with the rock writings that I know of for sure have been in Arizona, and you know what? I think I saw some in Utah going across I-70. We stopped at Ghost Rock. There's a little turnoff there. So I saw some in some of those areas. Is it the same? Is it similar type writing that's at your site that you were looking at where you went?
There is some differences because like the Phoenician is actually, it's an alphabet. And the Ogham are more like line drawings, 1 to 5 symbols. And then the Lydian also was based on the Phoenician alphabet because the Phoenician alphabet was used by many, like the Hebrew, the Greeks, and then the Romans. We have the Latin alphabet, which is based on the Phoenician alphabet, and go back. And I think most of the Native Americans, they used symbols, and that was a way of expressing their thoughts, their ideas, and a meaning, And I think you'd see more like the Egyptians used like a rebus, like they didn't use, the alphabet, they used the symbols, And actually, the Phoenicians borrowed initially 22 of those symbols to make the 22-letter Phoenician alphabet initially. But, I have seen those. In fact, when we were at the same area you were, we were out in the Four Corners. We were in Utah at Hopenweep for a whole day, and we saw at Mesa Verde, we saw a few carvings there, and they're called petroglyphs. And then we saw a few paintings and even some hand designs, which are actually pictographs. That means they're painted, And then down in Chaco Canyon, we saw a few more. I know other trips we've taken out there, we've seen more out towards Alamogordo. They were beautiful, loaded with, pictographs, paintings. They're so beautiful. And they do look different because ours kind of like cut into the rock, incised into the rock. If they used any colorization on these rocks, thousands of years ago, all of that's gone because New England weather does not preserve things very well at all. A groove can stay in the rock. It will get worn down. But a painting is pretty much gone. Even the ones we saw at Chaco were starting to fade after 800 years. But our carvings may go back, over 3,000 years, But fortunately, they're in pretty hard rock, and you can still make them out even though they've been weathering and, subject to a lot of, erosion and stuff like that. But, U.S. is loaded with ancient paintings and carvings. And some of the carvings we think are actually old world,
Yeah, I know that some of, like you were saying, some of this stuff is painted, and it just, I don't know why, and I know the reason why it's preserved in Arizona and New Mexico, and it's because in a lot of those places, and Utah, they don't get a lot of weather as far as rain and snow. They get more sun, so it might get sun bleached, but it's not going to get washed. It takes a lot to get rid of it. And the carvings, like you said, last longer. You're going to be able to feel those, but those still get eroded to where you can't read them very well. Has there been any aging done on your location?
Yeah, we have done radiocarbon dating starting in 1966. I think we have 12 different carbon datings that were taken, and a company in Cambridge, Mass. Called Geochrome Laboratories did, I think, 9 of them. And then Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute down in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, did 3 of them for us in the 1990s. The oldest charcoal that was found on the site, it doesn't date the stone, so it's indirect dating of a structure or some stone feature that's man-made. So it has to be organic material, something living at one time. And the oldest one was 4,000 years. And that was next to a chamber called the Chamber in Ruins, which is one of the chambers that we found 3 inscriptions in. And it's an interesting chamber. The roof slab's about 6,000 to 7,000 pounds. It's a gigantic rock slab that was removed from the bedrock, as I mentioned, and quarried and shaped. It has fallen into the structure. And over the doorway, when you would have entered the structure, there was about a 1,000-pound lintel stone, like a header. And that's laying underneath the gigantic roof slab today. The whole thing is collapsed in on itself. And I did see a structure just like that in Carnac, France, where some of the more famous, megalithic sites are located. I've been there too. It's the one with all the rows of stone, 3,500 stones in a row, but it has chambers and standing stones. There's a lot more than the rows. That's been on the History Channel a lot, that particular site. But the carbon dating was 4,000 years old. That's in the main site, the 1-acre area surrounded by the chain link fence, where most of the stone chambers, but not all, are located. When you go outside the main fence near the North Stone, when they were actually doing an excavation out there back in about 1990, they did find charcoal in front of the North Stone, as a matter of fact, right in front of it. Somebody used the North Stone as a backstop for a fire, and the fire was made in front of it. And that stone was subject to a 3-year excavation. It took 3 years from actually 1989, 1990, and 91. They worked on that. It was president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. And the charcoal came out of a fire pit, which was wonderful because you can date it. And the fire pit was actually a later feature. So if somebody historically built the whole site for the sake of argument a few hundred years ago, if they had placed the stone wall plus a standing monolith, that big arrowhead-shaped stone there, they would have disturbed not only the layers of soil called strata, but strata there, it wasn't disturbed. That means that's a great sign. They would have destroyed the fire pit. So if you dug a hole, stood up that stone, backfilled it, that whole thing would have disappeared, all the charcoal. So the stone was first, the fire pit was later. The charcoal dated to about 1,400 years old, 600 AD roughly. So we know that stone was standing there at least 1,400 years. We think it was standing there much, much earlier. At about 20 feet from there, they're doing what they call a shovel test pit. It's a 50-centimeter diameter hole, and basically it is a test pit. They're actually going down with a shovel to see if they find something, and if they do, they stop, and then they'll lay out those meter squares, put out all the strings, in the little quadrants, and then they work with it, toothbrushes and trowels. But what they found was looks like a remains of another fire pit. It didn't really date the standing stone. It was 20 feet from it. It didn't date the wall that's adjacent to it, but it showed human activity, and the date on that was done. It came back almost 7,500 years old, which is what they call the Middle Archaic time period. Because people often ask, who's here 4,000 years? Well, we know Native Americans were in New Hampshire between 10 and 12,000 years, that early. But there was somebody on that hill, we think, about 7,500 years ago building a fire. To kind of verify that date, back in 1977, we had done, from 1973 to 77, we had a professional surveyor come in and survey the walls and the astronomical alignments. We realized by 1973 we need a professional survey of the site to have everything done, as precisely as we can and done as correctly as it could. We sent that information to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Mass, and it took a few months to get the results back, and that was in the spring of 78, over 41 years ago. And the results were, they said that if your stones were used for astronomical purposes, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 200 years. And that agreed with that 1971 4,000-year-old carbon dating. So that's basically how we dated the site. And we're not done with the work on that. Through our new techniques today, we can actually date dirt. You get a core of dirt next to a stone structure or stone wall near the bottom of it, and they can tell you how long the dirt's been sitting there now. So that's pretty neat technology, as long as the dirt was never disturbed. So you build a wall, the dirt builds up slowly next to the wall, get the dirt near the bottom, send it into a laboratory with a couple other, they take other base corings too. And it's about 1,000 per sample. So if you do one wall, I think you had to take a couple of samples. So it can cost you a few $1,000s just for one test. So it's very expensive. But then you can actually kind of date these walls, whether it's a stone wall or a stone structure or standing stone, or any other kind of feature. So basically that's the only holdup at our site, because we have thousands and thousands of feet of walls we think are ancient. And some of these walls actually look like serpents or snakes. They have a head, a body, and a tail. And these are recent discoveries since my retirement 3 years ago. And they're finding them all over the Northeast, in Indiana, and actually in eastern Colorado and Alabama. In Alabama, they call these stone walls rattlesnake walls. And so our stone builders out here may have been perhaps more widespread across the nation. But the serpent walls might reflect Draco the dragon. And back then that would have been the pole star, and the Draco would have been spinning around its star, which is called Thuban or Alpha Draconis. So that would have been a very important part of the sky. The Egyptians thought that was the gateway to heaven because it was the only part of the sky that didn't move. And other cultures kind of felt that way too. So we're not only looking at sun, moon, and star alignments, we're looking at constellations now, and how they're reflected in the stonework. And they say it's called as above, so below. So those are rather recent discoveries, the serpent walls. We think we have 12 of them now and the longest one is about 2,550 feet.
Oh, wow. It sounds like a place I would like to visit just to see all the intricacies, because, well, I would like to get into some more of this, but we have a break coming up in about 2 minutes. But here's an easy question for you. Have bones been found on the site ever? Human bones?
Yeah, good question. There was one, about 1970, and they sent it to a museum, and they didn't carbon date it. And today they would do all sorts of tests on it, possibly DNA. But bones in New England usually rot in 200 to 300 years because the soil is so acidic. It's not conducive to bones lasting very long. But occasionally they do find bones a few thousand years old, because I get the New Hampshire Archaeological Society's publications, and every now and then you see a bone preserved in peat or maybe clay or some other thing. But we also found a couple other bones. One is about an inch long. It had a drill hole. It was found in a chamber called the Watch House, which is a satellite chamber not located on the main site. And that is actually a head of a serpent, one of the 2,500-foot serpents. But they found a bone, and they found a stone, triangular shaped, about an inch and a half tall with a drill hole. Bone and stone, we think, were pendants. And somehow that bone survived in the chamber. But we have found some other animal bones up there, but I think they're rather recent. So the bones up there, a few hundred years, they're back to dirt. And the first archaeologist, Mr. Goodwin, 80 years ago was digging. They just used shovels, and they looked for artifacts. They sifted the dirt. But they didn't test the soil. And some of these chambers we think were tombs because they're shaped just like the tombs in Europe. If they had saved the soil and sent it to a laboratory, they could check it for chemicals and say, although the bones are gone, this trace like calcium, potassium, etc., indicate there was a burial here, perhaps human, But that was lost about 80 years ago because the technology was, it just wasn't as sophisticated as today, It wasn't done as carefully. They didn't have all those they didn't even have carbon dating back then. It was 1950 that came out, so they didn't have all of that technology. So
technology has really helped your site.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's got a lot of promise too. There's other different techniques they can use. We're using LiDAR, the aerial photographs, and LiDAR is pretty cool. You can see through the trees, and you can see features you can't see as you walk around. Satellite, like World View 3 satellite, they've been using that to find more Egyptian pyramids, I think 19. They found 61,000 more temple sites in Guatemala using that satellite recently. And the second Viking settlement up in Canada was found by that, I think, 2 years ago. In Newfoundland, it took almost 60 years when they found Lonzo Meadow all the way up to the, 58 years, I guess it was, to find the second Viking settlement. But it was a satellite 300 miles in space that actually found it.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take our next break here. So you're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. We will be back in just a couple minutes.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Abnormal Alabama presents Crypticon October 25th and 26th at the Board of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Bigfoot, the paranormal, authors and speakers, vendors, and your chance to experience the Psychomantheum. There'll be a costume contest and much, much more. October 25th and 26th at the Board of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Get more info, directions, and tickets available now at abnormalalabama.com. That's abnormalalabama.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. My guest tonight is Dennis Stone, and we're talking about America's Stonehenge. And this is one of those, if you don't know about it, it's one of those hidden places in America that, well, I didn't know about it. So you guys are learning about tonight. So if you guys have any questions, please ask. We do have one question in the chat room for you that's probably a little bit off of your normal questions that you would get on a radio show. But Tom McNicholas asks, are there any paranormal experiences in that area?
Yeah, there are. We've had paranormal investigators come up to our site. A guy named Jeff Belanger's been up there. He writes for Ghost Adventures, and
I've talked to him on the phone.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah, and he's done videos on us and everything. And he would really be the guy to talk to about that. But we have had Hans Holzer. He came up in the 70s, and he even made it on national, Good Morning, one of those Good Morning shows, But he wrote books like Ghost I've Met. Then he wrote a book about us back in 1992, and it was called Long Before Columbus. Yeah, but it was about his experience in the 70s when he came up a couple times around 70, 74. He brought in 4 psychics over the course of a couple months. He didn't have them together. And in that book, it describes what they sensed up there, and they were talking about the type of people that built the place, and and they all seem to have this similar kind of answer. The type of people. One person was kind of shorter, darker complexion, and taller people, I guess, the way the 4 different psychics. And there were some other things they talked that were sort of similar too, and they didn't know each other, that they didn't come together. But when he came in 74, he had Betty Hill, and Betty Hill came up to meet him, and that's the first time he met her. And Bonnie had just died, a few years before that. So it's the interrupted journey with Bonnie and Betty Hill. And the next year, there was a TV movie that was made on Bonnie and Betty Hill's journey in 1961 in northern New Hampshire. And really one of the first and one of the best known abduction cases,
Right.
And I think Estelle Parsons played Betty, and then James Earl Jones played Bonnie. And my mom became a friend of hers until Betty died in 2004 or 3, I think. I heard that on a Coast to Coast show driving home from my airline job, I think. I'm like, what? And then I told my mom what happened. But she came up with Catherine Martin, and they kept coming back to the site. And just 2 years ago, I met Travis Walton at our site too. He was up there. But Hans Holzer actually wrote the script for Leonard Nimoy's show In Search Of on our site. So we were on that in 1977. But we've had ghost hunts on usually in this month, and we don't have anything this year. I guess for the last 2 years, we just haven't had any. But we've had them, and I usually work in the airlines. I was working usually Friday through Mondays. I got the best schedules, and I'd go on a 4-day trip, come back on Monday, and I missed all the ghost hunts, for years. So my wife, my son, and my daughter-in-law would see these ghost hunts, and they're the ones that went up there with all the equipment, with the ghost hunters, and they would have audio, they'd have cameras, and they had K2, I think it is, devices, all these different things. And they would see orbs and energy. And one of our visitors during the daytime, however, about 15 years ago, took this picture in part of the site we call the Patty area. And it's a family that was up there for a while. And there's a picture of it looks like a person, except it's all misty. There's no real person in it, but it looks like a person. It's one of those things. Is that something to do with, a reflection or angle or, something in the lens? But it really, so we had it on our website for probably a year or two, and everybody thought it was so cool. They said, that looks, pretty much like a person, So yeah, we've had a few things there, not, and it might have been a burial site, because of the chambers, the same style as burial tombs in Ireland and Spain, same size, the same shape, the same orientation of the structures. We have one that's called the V hut. Looks like a letter V, and it faces southwest, unlike the rest of the site, which is again true northeast and west. And the ones in Ireland. They call wedge tombs, and they come in a variety of sizes sometimes. But we saw a couple in County Meath, I think it was, my dad and I, and it's the same size, and it has the same shape, and they were used as tombs, for burials thousands of years ago. And next to that V-hut is an east-west chamber. We used to call it the Tomb of Lost Souls. And it runs about 30 feet east and west. It has these great big upright stones they call orthostats for the walls, and then it has big roof slabs. It was partially damaged during the 1850s when about maybe a third to a half of the site was destroyed by the family that was there. They were sawing off the rocks. And you can see about 12 drill marks that were used to split the stones and take the stones away. They started damaging that particular chamber. And in Europe, in Holland, they call them the Hoenbidden. It means a giant's bed, if I pronounced it correctly. They're in France. I've seen them in France. They're also in Ireland, in northwest Ireland, which I didn't get to. But they always run east and west, true east and west, and they run 20 to 60 feet in length, and they're used as burial chambers. So the same. And again, Mr. Goodwin cleaned out the site very nicely 80 years ago. He did a nice job with his crew right to the bedrock. So if there was any evidence, again, it was, taken out, shoveled out, sifted, and the dirt was thrown away. So, but the paranormal thing, we're kind of interested in that. We may do that again in the future. And what they usually do is come into our theater. They'll do like a briefing before they go up on the site at night. They'll do about a 30-minute briefing explaining equipment, what they're going to do when they get up there, and people, they just kind of manage everything and tell people what they can and can't do. And then they get up there. The people go up there and they'll do their, walk through the site and everything and use their equipment. And then afterwards, they'll go back down into the visitor center for about 30 minutes, and they put it on the big screen, what they found, if there's anything on the cameras or something like that, and review what they felt, experienced, and all of that. So it was kind of nice. We had a couple different groups that did it over the years. And what happened is a few of the people that were doing it retired from it. So the last 2 years, we just haven't had that.
Well, I can only imagine. And I talked to Jeff in 2014 and told him I wanted his job. I said, you have my dream job. I would love to be paid to research for a living. And because that's what I like to do. And we spent 45 minutes on the phone. So he's one of my favorite people to say, hey, I had his phone number for a while. Till I got a new phone. And he was very fun to talk with. But he was the one that got me on Ghost Adventures all those years ago when I was on. And so, like I said, I thought he has the best job ever. And I find the stuff that he writes to be interesting and easy to read. So, and people find him to be credible.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy, and he seems to be level-headed and down to earth. And he actually created I think he does a calendar of New England places that are haunted every year, and they're really beautiful calendars. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago he did one with us for the sacrificial table area, and it's a really beautiful picture, and I kept that calendar, even though it's a couple of years old now. I have it hanging up in our, what we call the war room upstairs. We've had a few, we've had a little war room where we had like TV shows, and they've gone up there and interviewed us up there. So that's hanging on the wall there, but that was done by Jeff, and it is really beautiful. And then it has other places in New England that are haunted, houses and hotels or whatever. Very nice job you did on it, though.
Another question you were talking about the stone chambers at your location. Were they the first things that were built on your location? Do you know, or can you speculate?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question, because we're not sure. The astronomical alignments that's a very significant part of the site, and we've had people even in the 70s commenting about the chronology. What came first? As far as the astronomical alignments, it looks like what we call the equinox sunset boulder, and it's actually the boulder, the end of the wall, a standing stone that's now fallen, and then that 2,550-foot serpent wall actually starts the watch house, goes around counterclockwise, touches every astronomical sunrise or sunset or moonrise or moonset stone, and it comes back and it kind of bites its tail, and it, you might have heard of the Ouroboros, the serpent biting its tail. And it can mean eternity, eternity, I believe it is. Yeah. And a snake can be like something to do with sexuality. It can also be protection. And what our thought is the serpent is protecting. It loops around the entire site outside of it, and it kind of protects the entire site. And we think they may have moved the astronomical center from that boulder to what we call the astronomical viewing platform, which is about probably over 100 feet. So we think they had an evolution of where they built part of the astronomical site, and everything does work off that boulder, or most of them do, and then they moved it to what we call the astronomical center. And from that center, we have possibly 49 alignments, which is more than the boulder had originally. And at Stonehenge, it was built over 1,500 years, starting almost 5,000 years ago, and they actually break it down into stage 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, and it actually evolved, and they actually put stones up. They took them down, and actually at the beginning, I think they had wooden poles they set up, and they can find the post molds today. Some were found in the old parking lot back in the 1960s. So they were setting up temporary wooden markers, and they replaced them with stone markers. And then as time went on, over 1,500 years, they kept changing Stonehenge, and I think our site kind of evolved like that too. But the question about the stone chambers, that's a tough one. We do know there's a complete network of underground drains. These are man-made drains. They're like storm drains, and they had to create those first. So they actually engineered the place pretty well. It was thought out. They built all these drains. Some of them are 75 feet long. Some are almost big for a kid to crawl through. And every time it rains and the snow melts, they still work, possibly 4,000 years later. But they built that network of drains, and then the structures are built over the top of them. And one thing we found in the last few years, we have about 33 stone slabs. These are huge stone slabs that weigh many, many tons, laying all over the 110 acres of land. Some of them are 1,000 feet from the main site and downhill. And how we know they're man-made is they've been split from the bedrock. The bedrock is granite. It comes up in layers. It's foliated like layers of an onion. And they split it, and they put little stones underneath, like a stone maybe 1.5 feet across, which is actually a glacial deposit, these rounded glacial type stones or field stones stuck underneath the bar, propping it up. And what they're doing to the edge of it is what they call percussion flaking. It's like knapping an arrowhead. It's smashing the edge of the stone with a stone hammer and shaping it, leaving a serrated edge on these monstrous stones. And the doctor of archaeology in the state at the time, in the 1980s, when the first one was found in 1982, he said it's unmistakable. They were shaping these big roof slabs and wall slabs and the monoliths for the astronomical alignments as though they were big arrowheads. It's a Stone Age technology, not a modern type of technique with metal tools. So maybe I think the site, they were building the site, and they had one astronomical complex with that boulder, and then I think they moved it towards closer to the main site, just north of what we call the sacrificial table. And so it kind of evolved, I think, over time is what I thought. And we had a couple people from the History Channel visit us. They're pretty well known in history, and that was one of the gentleman's thoughts. I did a radio show with him, and he was we were co-guest, and he was talking about how the astronomical, I'm like, wow, how did he pick up on that? He's visited the site once, he's read about us, but he had that because he's traveled the world and he sees these ancient sites, and he's on TV all the time investigating these things. And he came up with that without me even mentioning that fact to him. I was kind of amazed that he said the same thing we were talking about in the 1970s.
Wow. There's so many, there's about 50 questions running through my mind, none of which I think that I can get answered before our next break. That's the funny thing. If people wanted to find your website, what is your website?
Yes, it's StonehengeUSA.com, and we've had that, I think, since 1995. There's that email address in there and the phone number in there if people want to try to contact us. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, too, if they want to do that. We have almost 10,000 Facebook friends. But we try to answer all the questions. And a nice thing, too, we started last year is actually on a mobile app. We have a free app download under America Stonehenge. You can do it at home in your Easy Boy, I guess, or Easy Chair there. And it has our logo, America Stonehenge. It's apostrophe S in the Americas, and then Stonehenge. And you can pull it up, download it. It'll have text, pictures, and it talks to you. And people really enjoy it, taking the tour, but you can actually tour our site from your home.
Oh, so you can investigate from home.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard
Yeah.
Over the weekend. I heard some people talk about how they investigate remotely, and I was like, you can imagine. I mean, just imagine the look on my face when how you. It's like, how do you investigate cryptids at home? So it was like, okay, whatever. But you know what, everybody, we're coming up to the top of the hour. This is going to be our news break. You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. Our guest tonight is Dennis Stone. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever, please put them in the chat, and I will make sure that they get answered. But go enjoy your break, get your water, and come on back.
Before Congress. I'm Lisa Lacera, Fox News. One of President Trump's personal attorneys now must appear before lawmakers as they continue to move forward with their impeachment inquiry.
They are subpoenaing information from Rudolph Giuliani and also closed-door depositions before the 15th of October from some of his associates. And one of the most important things this week is we're going to hear from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in a press conference the middle of the week on Wednesday. She usually doesn't have a press conference in the middle of a recess, but that will be different this week. The other big thing goes on away from Capitol Hill, where some of these freshman Democrats in districts that favor President Trump are going to start having town hall meetings. I would look at Kendra Horn in Oklahoma, one tonight, Susan Wild tomorrow in Pennsylvania, Max Rose in New York City.
Fox's Chad Pergam at the Capitol. Friday, the same committee subpoenaed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, a U.S. citizen accused of spying for the Chinese government. Fox's Gernal Scott has more live.
Elisa, federal attorneys say Xu Huapeng, posing as a tour operator, transferred American security secrets to China. Prosecutors say the crime is not connected to an ongoing U.S.-China trade war. U.S. Attorney Dave Anderson says Pong acted as an unregistered secret agent, securing information from a double agent. It was then
he flew to Beijing, China, to meet with his MS handlers and to deliver the classified information.
And was paid handsomely to do it.
In the amounts of $10,000 and $20,000 at a time.
Pong, a naturalized citizen, faces 10 years in prison if he's convicted, Lisa.
Gernal, the family of opera great Jessie Norman has announced she has died from multiple organ failure related to a spinal cord injury she sustained in 2015. She was 74. Wall Street at the close, the Dow gained 96, the NASDAQ added 59, the S&P plus 14. America is listening to Fox News.
The following message is brought to you by TD Ameritrade. So you've done a ton of research on a trade, but you can't decide if you want to go through with it. TD Ameritrade's trade desk might be the secret to figuring it all out. Just go to tdameritrade.com/trade desk to see how they can help gut check your trades. Member SIPC.
Hong Kong police saying the city is on the verge of extreme danger and violence could soon break out as China celebrates its 70th birthday tomorrow.
Protest organizers are calling for the locals to take to the streets on Tuesday. The police are warning of hardcore violence, in their words, one step closer to terrorism. And in Beijing on Monday, Chinese President Xi Jinping talked of a bright future for Hong Kong, the special territory of China, but with a huge military parade planned in the capital. The last thing he wants is to see chaos here. There is a new report that China is building up its garrison of both troops and riot police.
Fox's Greg Palcott in Hong Kong. California defying the NCAA. Governor Gavin Newsom signing a measure into law that will allow college athletes to hire agents and make money from endorsements. All 4 inmates who escaped from jail in Ohio now back in custody.
The Gallia County Sheriff's Office confirms a 4th suspect, Lawrence Lee, was taken into custody in Durham, North Carolina, hours after 3 other inmates, Christopher Clemente, Bryn Martin, and Troy McDaniel Jr., were captured miles away in Cary, North Carolina, following the inmates' escape from the Gallia County Jail Sunday after overtaking 2 female corrections officers.
Our detectives have established that the inmates had the assistance in escaping from at least one individual on the outside.
Sheriff Matt Champlin, no word on why the inmates chose North Carolina. The process to extradite them back to Ohio is now underway. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The story gripped the world. The 12 young boys trapped in a cave in Thailand with divers frantically trying to free them. Now, the first of the films chronicling the event is due out. Director Tom Waller's The Cave premieres at a film festival in South Korea this weekend. More than a dozen rescue personnel play themselves, Waller calling them natural actors. I'm Lisa Lacera. This is Fox News.
The following message is brought to you by TD Ameritrade. Like the economy, investing can seem complicated until it's explained in simpler terms. That's how TD Ameritrade approaches investing, by learning more about you and your goals before crafting a plan. It's that simple. To schedule a complimentary goal planning session today, visit tdameritrade.com/goal planning. Member SIPC.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. I'm your host, Denise Pridemore, and my guest tonight is Dennis Stone, the owner of America's Stonehenge, and we are learning so much tonight. I hope that you've been listening, and I know I'm learning something. I hope all of you are. So, what is one of the questions that I have now after listening to you for the last hour is, what is the astrological meaning of America's Stonehenge? Do you know?
I don't know if I can answer that. I will say the astronomy, looking at the astronomical alignments, and because astronomy and astrology were one, before the 1500s when it became kind of a science, and the other. But the ancient people would have just looked at the heavens. The heavens would have been part of their world, and they depended on that for hunting, gathering, migrations of animals, and it told stories to them too, And in 1965, a CBS special came out called, I think it was called The Mystery of Stonehenge. And it was based on a book called Stonehenge Decoded by Gerald Hopkins. He was from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, originally from England. And he said that in the book, Stonehenge Decoded, that Stonehenge in England was a computer. It only showed the quarter days, which are our seasons, and I believe the cross quarter days, but also the moon cycle. The moon goes through an 18-and-a-half-year cycle. It's due to the fact the moon's orbit is tilted 5 degrees to the Earth's orbit. And so it goes through these extremes. Like in 1969, the year we went to the moon was one of the lunar major, what they call standstills. I always remember that. And then 9 years later, it goes through the minors, they call it. The moon is very close to the equator. And then again, 9 years later, after that, it goes to these extremes back and forth, where it rises and sets, both during the course of a year, north and then south. It's it's very, very obvious to people when they see it, but it takes 18 years to watch this event. And the sun does that in 1 year, where the moon takes 18. And he thought that if they could track the 18-and-a-half-year cycle, they also could predict eclipses. And, if you can predict eclipses, you would have a great deal of power, and you would impress your people incredibly, the population, especially seeing the moon or the sun, eclipse, it'd be quite an event. So he thought that Stonehenge was a computer, an ancient computer for doing that, which is pretty cool. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right, and that's what's kind of neat about all of these ancient sites is we don't know for sure exactly the reasons that they were built, but based on the things that we are witnessing, we can see. Logic tells us parts of the reasons why they were built. And a lot of it does go back to the sun and the moon, or related to that, religion, because sun and the moon went with their religions a lot back in those days. And it's one of the questions that I would have is your site like geometrically, like the other Stonehenge, where it was like they used I don't know. I know that they used a measurement to measure and all that, to where it's, everything is put, spaced out just right. Is your location like that, where it's all spaced out? in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, it is. It is. We're at a different latitude than Stonehenge. They're further north, of course, and it's kind of unique too because where their latitude is, when you look at the winter solstice versus the summer solstice on the sunrise, let's say, or the sunset, it's about a 90-degree angle. But as you change your latitude north and south, it changes that. But they're at a point where it's like a right angle there, between the two, which is kind of cool. And again, if you move north and south of that, you don't have that. And we're further south, so it's a little different. But we do have the cross-quarter days, which are your 4 seasons. And the cross-quarter days are even the bigger days, actually, in the ancient for the ancient Celts, for instance. And that's like November 1st, August 1st, February 1st, and May 1st. Those were actually the beginning of the season, so they're called cross-quarter days. But even at a site like Cahokia Mountain State Park in Illinois, one of the biggest, pyramid complexes in the world, I've been to that. It's right across from St. Louis. They had the cross-quarter days there, too. And Mesa Verde had that, too. I was there in 1990 and just 3 weeks ago. And they have there were astronomical alignments there, too. They actually had a north, south, east, west blocks in the ground. It's actually a stone box. And the park ranger pointed it out 3 weeks ago. He goes, that box is not aligned with the rest of the structures. He goes, that is the cardinal points on a compass, true north, south, east, and west. I'm like, oh, and I got a picture of that because our site is laid out like that, too. So they're very, very aware of the heavens above. So we have 8 parts of the year. We have the 4 seasons and the 4 cross-quarter days. The quarter days are the beginning of each season. So like May Day is the beginning of summer, June 20th to 21st, whatever it is in the year, is a midsummer solstice, and then you go August 1st would be the beginning of fall, end of summer. Fall would be, the middle of fall would be September 23rd this year. And November 1st will be All Saints Day, but it's also called Samhain or Samhain. Samhain, I think, is correct by the Celts. Beginning of winter. And it's when the veil is thinnest between the living and the dead. And you can communicate with your relatives according to many ancient legends and stories and religions. So that's a very special day. And then winter solstice is, December 22nd or 20th. I forget what it is this year. Midwinter, actually. We used to think it as the first day of winter, but if you hear it often said midwinter solstice, and that's because November 1st was the beginning. February 1st is the end, and that's Imbolc, and it's also Candlemas, and it's also near Groundhog's Days today, which we kind of celebrate. So some of the old ancient holidays have been adapted, and called something different today. Then February 1st or 2nd would be the beginning of spring, and the mid-spring, and then you go back to May Day, which is Beltane's of the Beltane fires, and Beltane, the ancient holiday. We used to have Mayfairs over here, Maypoles, the beginning of summer again, and then midsummer's back. And so we have all of those at our site. And then we have the 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycles. The next one, by the way, is coming up is 2025. And we're doing a clearing up on the hill so we can actually watch that for the first time ever when the moon goes through its major standstills north and south. We've never cleared those alignments since 1967, which was 2 years after we saw the TV show. That's when they began the astronomical research at our site. And then we have maybe 23 star alignments. We still have to research those. So maybe 49 alignments altogether.
Mm-hmm. Well, all I know, some of the things that you've talked about tonight have been so interesting and so different than what I normally talk about. And I'm finding all of this to be not only enlightening, but things that I want to go out and research some more. Because it's not something that I do. I mean, like I said, I've been to some of the places that you've talked about. I know I'm a volunteer at McPike Mansion, which is not probably 30 miles from the Cahokia Mounds.
Oh, wow.
My husband's been to the Cahokia Mounds. He went on a school field trip. He's from St. Louis. So that's cool. I know where they are. I mean, I know people who have gone over there and they've done weddings and drum circles and different things over there. So I know that it's a major location for a lot of different things. A lot of our shaman friends spend, I think, way too much time there. There's a lot of things to do, why spend it all at the mounds? But now I want to go and check it out and see some more, because I just had people from St. Louis at our museum, and I said, I've been to Coke, and they said they got a brand new museum there,
And so I haven't seen it in the museum, so I got to go back there. I was there in the early 90s. Its nickname is America's Woodhenge, by the way, Cahokia, because it has a big wooden circle, and it has those alignments we were just talking about. It was a wooden circle, not a stone circle, and they recreated part of it. So make sure you check out the Woodhenge part of, Cahokia Mound State Park. It's pretty cool, and it's astronomical. So you'd want to see that for sure. But St. Louis was called Mound City originally. That was sitting on the same type of mounds, and it took 15 years big cranes around the time, just before and after the Civil War. I got pictures of the cranes knocking the mounds down. So it forms kind of the base of St. Louis. And you probably know there's a few mounds still there, but it was a huge complex like Cahokia, I guess, originally. And it was called Mound City originally.
Well, we've got some other mounds. We have another mound city on this side of the state. I live along the state line of Kansas and Missouri. And we have a mound city on the Kansas side and one on the Missouri side. So, and they're not really that far away from each other. I'll have to check and see if they have anything like that in either one of those. But I did not know that about St. Louis. The things I knew about St. Louis are all things that my husband has told me or that had to do with the paranormal. And so I'll have to look at that. And, like I said, we drive by where the exit for Cahokia Mounds on 255, and off. There's also an exit off 64. We drive by it all the time. I've never been, so maybe
it's so
sometime.
Close you don't go.
well, it's not really that close. I mean, usually when we're leaving McPike, it's 350 miles to McPike.
Oh, it is a ways then. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But when we leave McPike, we're either coming home because we've worked our tails off, or we're leaving to go someplace fun, like a distillery tour in Kentucky, or or a tour down, or going to check out some moonshine distilleries in Gatlinburg, or family in Tennessee.
Oh yeah.
And this year,
my wife's going down there now. I mean, pretty soon, in another 2 weeks, so I'll have a stop there.
Going down to where?
Pigeon Forge. Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg to a show. Yeah, my daughter-in-law and her are going. I wanted to go, but I've been there a few times.
Well, tell her to make sure that she picks up her coupons so that she can get her free glasses and all that other stuff, because you do enough of the tours and stuff, they give you free shot glasses and free wine glasses, and you can get drunk for almost free.
I know, that's why I wanted to go.
It is so much fun. Well, and they just opened up the new glass walk in Gatlinburg. It's a glass bridge going from the top of the skylift there. And when you get to the top of the skylift, it's off to the left, and you can go over. You walk across this gorge, and there's this huge area that's glass where you can look down. And it's like, I'm terrified of heights, so it's not going to do me any good. Yeah. So
my wife won't like that either.
I mean, I'd probably still do it, and Ron will probably have it on camera to make everybody laugh at me. But that's a whole other problem. But this time we're going down. We're going to go down towards Cat and see her down here towards. We're going to Florida this time, but we're going to drive through where Cat is and bug her. So I always have I have a plan every vacation. So, but yeah, we never have time to do that. So maybe one time when we're visiting in St. Louis, we'll just have to go over to Cahokia and check that out.
If you're going to Cat, I think there's Moundsville, Alabama. That's one of my bucket lists. It looks really impressive, like Cahokia, Moundsville. I don't know how far it is from Cat, but it's in that same state. There's a
huge mound at Moundsville, West Virginia.
Yeah, that's where my publicist lives. Yeah, Grave Creek Mound. That actually has some inscriptions too that seem to be Celt Iberic. But that's one of those conical burial mounds, and there's one in Miamisburg, Ohio, that looks so much like it, a burial mound too. So I haven't been there. I've been to West Virginia many times, Charleston, but it's not there. It's quite a ways from where that is.
I've been
overnight for the airline.
I used to when I went to West Virginia, I was a kid. So most places we went, Greenbrier. My mom took us to Greenbrier. But that was because she lived there. Yeah. And she's the one opened my mind to the Greenbrier ghost. So that was a long time ago. And but my family's from Virginia, West Virginia area. So I know that area well, but I don't know it well as far as ghosts and paranormal and locations. I can tell you which coal mines I've been in. I can tell you where my family's lived, but I can't tell you much more because as an adult, I've only been so many places as an adult to make grown-up memories. And grown-up memories, kid memories are great, but grown-up memories seem to be more legitimate.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but as a child, those memories are more fantastical. But when you have those memories as an adult and you tell somebody about them, they're going to believe you more as 30, 40, 50 something than they are as a 6-year-old.
Right. Yeah. Because a little fantasy going on when you're really young, fantasize it. Yeah, a little bit. Right. Exactly. And there are some mounds. I mean, like you mentioned, West Virginia, and when I talk on radio a lot, we talk about some of the sites in the Northeast, but they may have been 1 million mounds in the United States, from Florida up to Ontario, Canada, all the way up to Kansas, and even in Texas there's Cato mounds, and there's about 200,000 or 300,000 of them. Most of them pyramidal, some effigy shaped like animals, and others are geometric, like a lot in Ohio. There's 10,000 in Ohio. There were mounds.
Yeah,
some are
I heard that.
Beautiful.
But I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you. We're at our break.
Okay.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. We will come back and finish talking about some of these mounds in just a few minutes.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. I'm your host, Denise Pridemore, and my guest tonight is the lovely Dennis Stone, who's been telling us so many things that I never knew, and I'm grateful. So you were telling us about mounds when we left, and I know that there's a bunch in Ohio that I saw something on TV recently about the mounds in Ohio, that there's one there that's shaped like a giant serpent.
Right. Yeah, and that's famous now. Yeah, the Great Serpent Mound, and it's about 1,350 feet long, and it's a beautiful mound that they think there's a date, either sometime around 1100 AD, and it was part of the Fort Ancient group, or it goes back 1400 BC, I believe the date. So there's quite a difference in time periods. I think it's probably older, And interestingly enough, they found it was built on the side of some sort of a meteorite crater, right on the rim of it. And you wonder if the ancient people saw the type of stone material there, and they decided that was going to be a sacred spot. But part of the shape of that crater is actually where the head is, I guess, and it actually faces the summer solstice sunset, which is kind of neat. And they actually just built that right into it. So there's summer solstice, equinoxes, but the head of it is actually based on a natural kind of stone formation that's facing that summer solstice. So maybe that was even part of their inspiration, of building it there. And that's about 1,350 feet long. They think it looks like Draco, the constellation that we mentioned before. And our biggest one is, 2,550 feet long, we believe, so about twice as long. Ours is made out of stone. That's made out of earth, although I think there's a stone foundation in there. And I read recently there's 94 of those earthen serpents across the country, even going out to Idaho. So it's not the only one, but I think it's the largest, and it's pretty spectacular when you look at it, especially from aerial shots. And there are other mounds around there, of course, and Ohio had about 10,000. Our first archaeologist I mentioned back in the 1930s, he actually was out there before he was at our site. And he was from Hartford, Connecticut, and he was related to the J.P. Morgan. He was a first cousin. So the Morgans and the Goodwins lived in Hartford, and he was a insurance executive, and he at one point, but he lived in Ohio, and he used to go on his days off and start mapping some of those mounds for the Highway Department of Ohio back over 100 years ago. He was doing that. Indiana has about 5,000 mounds, and one of the stone constructions looks just like one of our S-shaped serpents. It has the same shape, and it's going across the river called the White River in Mound State Park, Indiana. And the picture I have of it's 100 years old, and I don't know if the thing still exists. It could have been wiped out by a flood, perhaps, because they haven't been able to find any up-to-date pictures of it, and it still might be sitting there, but it's next to mounds too. So Indiana has 5,000, because in Wisconsin, Madison and Milwaukee, the cities are built over ancient mounds, just like St. Louis. And Lexington, Kentucky are sitting on mounds. And then in Florida, where some of the pyramids are, under St. Petersburg and Clearwater, they're actually sitting over where ancient pyramids made out of shells were once located, So a lot of it's underneath some of our modern, cities and highways and stuff like that. So, yeah, they go all the way from maybe 1 million at one time. And then on the West Coast, are you familiar with the NASCAR lines down in Peru, the beautiful, geoglyphs in the desert, the artwork? Well, on the river, it's the river, the Colorado River that runs in past the Grand Canyon, comes into California, near Blythe, California. There's between 200 and 300 of these desert artwork. Just the same kind of thing you'd see down in Peru, which is so famous, world famous down there. It's on TV almost the whole time about the NASCAR lines. But the ones in California are amazing too, and you just really don't even hear about them. So from coast to coast, from Mexico to Canada, you really don't hear much about the mounds or the geoglyphs or even our site. But we do have an ancient past. I was watching a show, one of the Good Morning Today kind of shows, and one of the hosts said, "Isn't it wonderful?" In the middle, one of the anchors or one of her colleagues had just come back from the Middle East, and they were both sitting there discussing how much history there is over there, and there is. And then they said, "Isn't it a shame we don't have that type of history in the United States?" And I almost fell off my chair. Mesa Verde's, and it's a national park. How can they say that? The United States is just full of ancient history, but it's not taught in schools. It's really not in the textbooks. And I grew up not knowing about one mound, never mind, possibility of 1 million at one time.
Right.
So, yeah.
See, I
history books, I think.
I knew about a lot of them in Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. Not this many of them, but I used to have a thing for the Mayans and the Incas when I was growing up. I wanted to know more about them, and so I would research those as much as I could. And of course, back then you had to know the Dewey Decimal System to be able to find anything. So people these days go look at you and go, what kind of measurement is that? And it's like, no, it's you had to actually know how to find a book in the library back then.
And
or you had to know how to use the microfiche machine. That was fun.
Right.
Nowadays, if it's not, digital back then meant something totally different than digital now. And so I would research this stuff, and we would play school. And when we would play school, I would teach people about the Mayans and the Incas. That's what I would do. And that's what, I know odd when you hear it now. It's like, whoa, what a weird kid. But my Barbie dolls knew everything there was to know about the Incas and the Mayans. And
well educated.
Yeah, they were. And so
that's cool.
But it was always fun for me to research this stuff. And my mom would go, what are you looking at? You don't want to know. So I heard from somebody whispering in my ear that you're working on a book.
Yeah, we've had a few books written over the years, even going back to Goodwin wrote a book on us in 1946. And it was called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England. He thought our site was a Viking site when he first saw it in 36. And then he changed his mind to an Irish Celtic monk monastery, 1,000 years old, and he died in 1950. But he wrote a few books like The Truth of the Belief Erickson. But the book on us was one of the first, really, although we are mentioned in the history of Salem going back to 1907 when our site is talked about. And there's some newspaper articles going back into the 1930s before Goodwin all about the site. So there is records of the site before Goodwin ever came in 36. But my dad wrote a book, actually co-authored with another gentleman back in 77. And then in 2003, he came out with his last book, which was a co-authored book. And we sold the last one this year. But last year we decided, because we found, many different things, including more quarried slabs all over the hill. We found the serpentine walls. And we have another thing we found. We believe they're spirit windows. They're actually in the stone walls, these beautiful linteled windows. And there's about 13 of those that have been found so far. And they're found at other places in New England. And we think it's kind of a portal sort of a thing, They seem to have stone shutters that would block them up. And these look just like windows, and they're either at the bottom of the wall, midway up the wall, and sometimes closer to the top. But they're found in, there's a big site, biggest complex, I think, scattered over a town is in North Stonington, Connecticut. There's 8,000 features. And the same kind of stonework is at our site, and also similar features out in Colorado and Alabama, as I mentioned, the same kind of stuff. So we're creating a book. It will be out, I think, in the spring. Next spring it will be out. It's in a rough draft right now. And we just finished putting a PowerPoint presentation together to do a couple lectures this year. As far as West is California, we're actually doing a lecture out there in Arizona. So we were working on a PowerPoint, and I've been working on the book. I'm going to get back to the book again and hopefully have it out actually for that lecture out in Santa Cruz, which will be next July 4th, actually. So we'll put the book out. We'll have all the new updates in it, anything new, anything we find that's new. We put out a souvenir book last year, and it sells like hotcakes. But it's basically a souvenir book. It has pictures and text, and, it replaced the 1996 souvenir book. So we're kind of getting everything caught up to date now. But yeah, people can, and one of the things we just did, as I mentioned, is that free download app, and you can take a tour of the site, and that's pretty much up to date too. So we're trying to stay with the latest, latest technology and everything. We actually beat a lot of the national parks to that too. They're starting to do that free app download and take a tour with your phone, your smartphone. It's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, they have that at some of the parks out here.
Okay.
Some of the battlefield sites in Missouri. I happened to download one for Wilson's Creek, and so it's kind of interesting. Yeah. So it was one of the big battles that with Pea Ridge and another one, Carthage.
Oh, Carthage. I've heard of the Wilson Peak one though. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, there was two battles in Carthage. There was an early one and a late one. Carthage was one of the first major battles west of the Mississippi. So.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Random stuff I have in my head, which is fun.
Yeah, that's like me.
Yeah. All kinds of random stuff. So,
yes.
Have drones have helped you get a lot of aerial pictures of your location, haven't they?
Yeah, that's coming in now with research, and you can put LiDAR on drones. And we had a gentleman that moved in from the West Coast, and he took thousands and thousands of shots, both with a high definition color camera and I think the other camera, which was a thermal imaging camera, was about 12,000, and the drone was like 6,000 or 7,000. And he came down and he loved our place. He was offering his services to us, and he's going to take the high definition color and the thermal imaging camera images, I say, and put it together. He has to rent software, like $350 a month, and it's so much data, and they'll put it together and create a 3D model of our hill, about 1 square mile. And he said under ideal conditions, a thermal imaging camera can see down to about 14 inches into the ground. So if some artifact or something's hiding in the ground, it may, reveal itself that way. So we're kind of excited. We are going to do a forest management program up there. We're going to thin out the entire forest, so protecting the stone walls, and so we'll be able to see all these different features, including the serpent walls, much better. And it'll be more of a canopy of like a forest instead of a jungle like it is in some of the areas. LiDAR is also a great tool, and they're putting those on drones, and that actually strips away the trees. The thermal imaging camera does not like trees. It leaves big blanks on the pitch tree where there's leaves, or pine trees are bad too because it just blocks the view year round. So we're using LiDAR, we're using thermal imaging camera. The World View 3 satellite would be pretty cool. That space, a satellite, that would be pretty cool if they could aim that at us, but it's very busy right now. And the lady that is actually doing it is out of Alabama, and I believe she knows Kat, and she's called the space archaeologist, and she's the one that's found so many of the new finds in Egypt and the Viking settlement and everything. And but they're using that all the time. I'm sure it's all tied up for months and months and months. But the technology is pretty cool. We've used ground penetration radar at our site. It was made right in our town. It was made a quarter of a mile from where we are. It was a neighbor practically. But unfortunately, they moved downtown in our town of Salem, and then they moved over to a town called Nashua, about 20 miles away. But they were using their equipment in the 90s, and you could actually see like charcoal fire pits. You could actually see underground drains with it and other archaeological features. So it's really like X-ray vision, and I wish we had it, but it's very, very expensive. And we haven't seen those people for, 2 decades, but they did leave us some of the equipment, which we have on display in our museum. And today it's much better than it was 20 years ago. The software and the hardware, you can actually, if something on the ground looks like a barrel, doesn't look like a bunch of squiggly lines you have to interpret. It actually looks like the image, I've been told. So that would be another great tool that we'd love to use again at our site.
Well, I know we've been seeing a lot more of the LiDAR, and then the planes that fly over that remove the ground cover and all that, and then the ground penetrating radar. All that stuff is so interesting. But when you were talking about the trees, I've noticed in graveyards how some of those trees being over the stones really tear up the stone on a gravestone. It just causes things to grow, different kinds of I don't know what it's called, but it looks terrible. And it also gets in, helps the stones to erode faster. So I could see where you would want to remove some of especially the pine trees, because they are horrible, especially with the sap.
Yeah, it's a mess. Yeah, exactly.
So like I said, I wouldn't blame you.
Yeah, and the trees blow over, they uproot stuff, and then when they fall, I know in North Stonington they just did the same thing. We're going to do it. It's a 35,000 acre town, and the structures cover a great deal of it, but there was 100 acres it's conserved, and they just did the same thing that we're doing on 100. They just did a forest harvest last year, and some of the guys spoke at that my dad's group, the New England Antiquities Research, and some of the guys actually did the operation, and it came out so well. They protected all the stone features and the structures and everything, and it protects the structures because a lot of damage is trees falling on them, or as you mentioned, the roots get in there and they just tear everything up. So they left the forest, but they backed everything away from all the chambers and walls and everything, which will help preserve them, Because I think in ancient times, most of the area was pretty clear up here. Our hilltop is a pretty big bald hill, and I think Stonington also is a clear. But over centuries, the trees have grown up. The area in Stonington is not farmable. The soil's not arable. It's hilly, rocky, and just very poor for any farmers to ever go in there, and they never did. So that protected this site from people farming in there and building stuff and tearing things down. Same thing as on our hilltop. It's all rock. And it was a bald hill. And 4,000 years ago, we ran all these shovel test pits. And like I mentioned, the archaeologist, her husband was a geologist. And what we came up with is hill pretty bare back then. So the forest wasn't there at the time. So it's different. It's Stonehenge in England, though. They did have a forest problem 5,000 years ago. I visited it a few times. It's pretty open there, very few trees. But 5,000 years ago, there was a forest, and that would have really blocked a lot of the astronomical alignments. But I think they consumed the trees for logs, for log rollers, for cremation, because they did do cremation there. Some of the 56 Aubrey holes had cremations ashes. Some of them did, so it was kind of a burial place too. But Stonehenge does not have a forest problem today, But they did, and we've gone the other way. We didn't have a forest problem thousands of years ago, and today we have a forest that we have to open up so you can see alignment, just the reverse of Stonehenge.
Yeah. Now they also got on a windy day, you don't want to be out there because it's really cold.
It is. Definitely.
Yeah. A friend of ours went last year, and he said, I should have went in the middle of summer because it would have been much better because it was really cold when the wind was hitting me in the face.
Oh, you're right. The last time we went there about almost 20 years ago, my son was very young, and it was cold. It was raw, and the wind was blowing the rain horizontally there. So it can get pretty brutal there, I think it was in the winter we went too. So, yeah, maybe the late summer, maybe early fall might be okay, but it does get pretty brutal over there.
When is the best time to visit your location?
Yeah, October, I think, because there's no mosquitoes. The days are shorter, but it's nice, cool air. In the summer it gets so hot and sticky, even up here in New England, and the mosquitoes can come out in June, and the winter we open year round. We do snowshoeing in the wintertime. We're open 363 days a year. We close for Christmas and for Thanksgiving, but we're open from 9 to 5 every day. Even in the winter, at 5 o'clock, it's dark in the wintertime around the solstice, but we stay open. And so I think October is probably it's when the leaves come out. We have the leaf peepers come up. And the problem is that all the hotels start to fill up and the rates go up a little bit. But either late summer, late September, or early October is really good to visit.
Yeah, that's the problem in Branson, down here. When the leaves change. Gatlinburg, the same thing. October, if you go down there the third week in October, cost is higher, and because everybody wants to see the changing of the leaves. I was like, I don't get it, but that's because we live in a place where our leaves change at our house. We can see them. We don't need. I don't need to go on the road to see it. It's funny.
It gets crowded.
But up where you live, there are actually tours to go see. The leaves change.
There's a lot of there is.
Yeah, I remember Taste of Home used to have a tour that would go up through Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts to go taste food and to see the leaves change. But we're at our next break. Everyone, you're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. And we'll be back in a few minutes with Mark Stone. And if you have any last questions for Mark, please get them in the chat room so I can get them asked. So come on back.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Abnormal Alabama presents Crypticon October 25th and 26th at the Board of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Bigfoot, the paranormal, authors and speakers, vendors, and your chance to experience the Psychomantium. There'll be a costume contest and much, much more. October 25th and 26th at the Board of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Get more info, directions, and tickets available now at abnormalalabama.com. That's abnormalalabama.com.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. And when we left, I said my guest was Mark Stone. Brain fart. My guest's name is Dennis Stone. I should be able to remember that since I'm called Dennis all the time. So hopefully you guys can all forgive me for that. But again, we were laughing that it could have been worse. I didn't call him anything bad. So, and he's laughing, so that's good. He needed a good laugh. So, do you have any events coming up in October at your location?
Let's see, October. The next actually astronomical thing will be the winter solstice, and we were, like I say, doing the ghost hunts on Saturday evenings, and we had somebody almost lined up in August, and then they got a hold of us and said their schedule, and they looked really good. They're from New Hampshire, and they're only about 30 minutes away, but their schedule could fill up. So really nothing other than we are starting a forest management harvest program. We were just talking about that. We are going to be thinning over 6 weeks some of the forest, and thinning it out, and we're going to be creating more snowshoe trails and protecting all the stone features. So this year, no ghost hunt, but maybe next year we're kind of working on that. We got a couple people possible. I wish Jeff Belanger would come down and do it, but and he hasn't been back for a couple of years. He did a really nice YouTube on us, but we'll look forward to something like that for sure. I do have a couple lectures coming up, but that's just me going out on the road doing a few lectures in New England, one up in Maine, and then one in Massachusetts this year, and then next year I'll be out in Santa Cruz around July 4th. So nothing in October other than that forest management thing right now.
Well, every little thing helps. How much does it cost to tour your site, to tour America's Stonehenge?
Yeah, well, we have group rates too for for any age groups. We have special rates for that. And I think that's on the internet. Now, normal admission would be $13 for adults. And if you're military, AAA, and senior, there's discounts on top of that. And there's another discount I can't think of offhand. But then from the age of 12 to 6, I think it's, off the top of my head, I think it's like $750 for children, and under 5 is free. And we have family memberships that are good for a year. And then if you do that, either an individual or family, everything is 10% off. And if they have their own snowshoes, they can come up and use all our snowshoe trails. They just show the card when they walk by. So those rates, I think, are all on the internet, or you can either that, or I'm pretty sure that they are. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't look at it every time. It's on our webpage, basically, So make sure you look at the right webpage. Some of the pages come up and not our webpage, and they don't have hours of operation, which is 9 to 5, and people come up at 5 o'clock expecting to, and it's not that's not what our webpage. They look at the wrong web page. I don't know what it is, but it's not correct, So
it's probably for Stonehenge.
It could be for Stonehenge.
But from what I understand, Stonehenge is permanently closed, from what I understand, the last time I looked. Because we were planning a trip to Virginia, and they moved it. It was in one place, and then they moved it. I don't know why you'd spend all that time moving foam, but I don't know. But it was just something I was like, sounds interesting. I mean, funny interesting, not interesting as interesting. So it's no different than going to see something on, say, Route 66. You know, we go off some beaten paths sometimes, you know, just to check out something, you know, depending upon what it is. This last time it was pie. You know, we had to have pie in Williams, Arizona. And it was really good pie. I can't stop talking about it. Can't wait to go back. Or off of 70, we had to stop at the Crystal Geyser. I almost lost our car, but we went. So don't go to the Crystal Geyser. It may not go off, but it was interesting anyway for a few minutes. So, is there any, you know, water is always important at a lot of these sites. I don't know about mound sites if water's important. Is there a water feature on your property?
There's no really running water up there. There's 2 wells, an upper well and a lower well. The upper well, we think, was a mine shaft for taking out quartz crystal. That was opened up in 1963. There's no spring of water in there. It's about 22 feet deep. The last 4 feet was actually quarried through bedrock. And when my dad cleaned it out in 1963, the bottom of it gets wide, which is a surprise. You can actually get in the bottom of it. It widens out. And there's a vein of quartz crystal. And quartz crystals was used by ancient people. You know, it had different meanings to different cultures, but it was something that was very special to them, you know. And we think that was actually a mine shaft to do that. The lower well is about 12 feet, and we've never dug it to the bottom because you hit water. There's a water table. And so we don't know the age of it. Someday we'd like to dig it down and see what artifacts are at the bottom and how deep it goes. It could be something ancient, you know, or it could be something historic. So that one's on our, you know, definitely on our list to do. On the west side of the hill, we have the Spigot River. On the right side, or the east side of the hill, we have water that goes into the one of the major rivers called the Merrimack River. And not 8 years ago, down near the mouth of the Merrimack, they were doing some construction, and they found a Phoenician coin that came out of the ground. So it was right after my dad passed away. So that's kind of interesting, too, because we have the Phoenician writing, and as I mentioned, found in different parts of the country. But that coin came out right near the mouth of the Merrimack River. There is a whole network of underground drains I mentioned. But yes, a lot of these sites are built next to streams, brooks, or rivers throughout New England. There's always seems to be a stream nearby, you know, and because rivers would be used for transportation and for fishing, you know.
And for drinking
water. And for drinking water, right. And they would live actually probably closer to those rivers, you know, down the hill near the Spigot River would be a place. Unfortunately, that's where all the homes are built today, probably sitting over ancient, you know, habitat sites that are now buried. So, which is a shame, you know. I mean, that's, you know, that's just what happens. But that's probably where the people live too, you know, right near the river. Yeah. To the west of our site, we have the Pawtucket Indian Trail. It's called the Pawtucket Indian. That's how it's listed on the map. So we have a historic Native American trail just to the west of us, and then on the other side is the Pentucket. So there's a Pentucket and a Pawtucket, and that's the name of 2 tribes that were in this area right around our hilltop. So we were right near 2 ancient highways, not only the rivers, but near pathways too. And again, a lot of these sites are built near rivers, you know, as you were mentioning, kind of a water feature for drinking, transportation, fishing possibly. And then I think the game animals would go down there too and drink water. And if you wanted to hunt, you know, that would be a spot. And the soil down there is more fertile if you're growing any type of crops too. So yeah, there's always water features near these, definitely. Yeah.
One of the things that would make, do you think anybody ever lived in American Stonehenge?
That's a good question. I think the structures could have been used temporarily if somebody was up, you know, hunting or something like that, maybe a later use. But we don't think the site is a habitat. We haven't found the middens. Usually you find middens or trash pits where people threw their trash, you know, when they were living, and those are great. But like most of the megalithic sites in Europe, it makes it frustrating for the archaeologists in Europe too, like Stonehenge and all those other sites. There are tombs, temples, and monuments, not living places. But with satellites and all that new technology, they are finding in Europe actually the places where these people live. And they were living in hide wicker bark homes, and those are perishable, and you can't really see them, But some LiDAR are showing, and other imaging from satellites are showing patterns where these villages were, and archaeologists love that. They're getting in there and they'll start finding all sorts of tools, utensils, possibly, even possibly some burials, although the tombs are used for that purpose. And so over here, the area is so built up with houses, we think the sides of the hill, however, it's 110 acres. We've been looking for habitat. We did find a workshop area 25 years ago, and it looks like they were importing material from the Boston area, almost 40 miles away, and making stone tools. So that may have been a habitat. We're going to expand upon that because the people obviously live somewhere. But as far as the structures go, they're really not set up for living, The big chamber, or the big stones that make up these chambers, but not a lot of room inside. The oracle chamber does have a bed in it, though, a stone bed that's 8 feet long that could have been used by a priest or shaman, probably just on special occasions like a solstice, He probably didn't live there. He probably went there during those ceremonial days. And there's 5 closets in that stone structure. There's a stone bench. There's a stone chimney with stone louvers. There's 2 carvings of a deer and an arrow carving in there, so petroglyphs. And it just has so many different features in there that you wouldn't find if it was built by some farmer back 200 years ago. It's very, very sophisticated. Yeah, and it looks like a Y if you look down at it from above. It has a Y shape to it. We used to call it the Y cabin, but it's called the oracle. They had a 6-foot tube that goes through to the sacrificial table. A voice projected through that comes out under the table, and people outside would hear a voice thinking it was a spirit or a god talking to them. So, yeah, we think ceremonial probably was the use of that site.
And another question. Since you're so knowledgeable about this stuff, have you appeared on any national TV shows?
A few, yeah. I'll say the first show on us was really back in 1970 on an NBC special when everybody had like 3 networks and NET TV, And it was an NBC show. It was Arthur C. Clarke and Rod Serling, and it was called The Unexplained. And William Shatner recently started that same name show up again, but that was a special. I think on 1976, they filmed this for Leonard Nimoy, and I was in the background. I didn't get really a talking spot. But I've been on different shows like Scott Walter's show, America on Earth. I've been on C-SPAN's The Yellow School Bus. That was over 20 years ago. And I've been on Arthur Kent. It's called History's Mysteries, and that was out in 2001. I was on that. Secret Passage was the same year. And I was on a couple other shows too. I kind of lose my mind, but yeah, I've been on a number of TV shows. Yeah, we were just filmed by Ancient Aliens, and that was on this summer, and that really brought us a lot of attention, kind of worldwide. So that was actually quite good.
And you said that Ancient Aliens has aired?
Yeah, it aired July 19th, and it aired 5 times, and I'm sure it's going to air again. They showed our site and a couple other sites in New England and one in New York. New York Hudson Valley has over 200 of these sites in Westchester and Putnam County, the most of any part of the Northeast. It's the highest density of structures. And they filmed there. They showed that. They showed a site in Connecticut and us. And so we were a big part of that 1-hour show. They kept going back to our site and really brought a lot of attention, and Scott Walter's show did. And William Shatner did film a show called Weird Places 8 years ago, and I was on that show too with William Shatner. So we've had Spock and Kirk and Rod Serling and a few others like that, over the years, which is kind of neat, people that are pretty well known have done stories. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Well, one of Kat's favorite shows is Ancient Aliens. She talks about that quite frequently.
Oh,
so yeah, that's good to know.
It's a big show. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I'll leave those questions to her because she's more into that than I haven't. I'm not real big into aliens and stuff, but I'm learning. I am really starting to learn. So I know that we are coming to the end of the show, And I'd like for everybody who's been listening to go check out americastonehenge.com. Isn't that the webpage?
Yeah, America Stone. Yeah, it's StonehengeUSA.com, StonehengeUSA.com. And if they want the America Stonehenge, would be the free down app. You can actually look at us with the audio. It's kind of a cool thing. You can actually take a tour of our site. But StonehengeUSA.com will be the webpage, and we have Facebook and Instagram and that kind of thing too. So they can check us out on those. And we have an email. They can send us a question if they have it, and the phone number is in there too. So.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on and teaching us about America's Stonehenge, the mounds across America, and even some around the world. We've learned a lot tonight, and thank you for filling in when I needed somebody. And all of these shows that I've had to do with fill-ins have all turned out well, and this is another one I can say, hey, on the fly, I can do it. And so thank you so much for being on. And next week, I don't know who my guest is going to be, but it'll be great. I can guarantee that. I've been trying to find a good one, and I'm going to find you a good one, and I think you guys are going to love it. I think it's probably going to be somebody that you've never heard me talk to before again, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So make sure you come back and join in so that you can learn something new from the Paranormal Pride, and WBHM-DB.com will be here waiting for you next week. So, like I said, you're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama, and we can't wait to see you next week. Thank you.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.